Alright, patch 25.07. This is April Fool's patch. Let's see if it's not a filler in comparison to the other patches throughout this year. So, we're going to have a lot of nerfs, buffs, adjusts, and systematic changes. April Fool theme when it comes to map, and also some champions. For example, Garen is going to be one of those fun changes. LeBlanc is going to get a visual update, and keep in mind she's coming in the April 3rd, not when the patch releases. So keep in mind about that. Demon's Hand overall, we're really excited. This is basically a game, so yeah, it's nothing different. Systems, Homeguard and Fountain. So, in my perspective, before we look into the numbers, um, the Fountain healing with the Symbiotic Souls has been fairly broken for quite a while, and it will still be reliable. It won't be a liability. Like even though they will reduce to 8%, 10%, uh, it doesn't really matter. You're going to lose very short amount of time, and symbiotic souls will not be usually affected by this as much as Riot wanted it to be. Early game missing HP and mana per second is going to go 16%. So basically, when you're really low HP, you go up quicker. But when you go in the middle ground, then it starts to go slower in comparison to before, if that makes sense. Okay, movement speed is going to be a bit lower, and 14 to 40 movement speed is going down by 10%, only in early ranks. Honestly, yes, it's a nerf, but symbiotic souls in the champions that are supposed to use them, and Homeguard Fountain Healing is still a good way to bypass bad laning phase, so I don't really expect this to change too much, at least. A really good change is in lane swap detection. So basically, in mid lane, there was some moments where if someone, a support or top laner, but basically a support, would stay near the Raptor pit, it would trigger the lane swap detection. So it's no longer going to be the case. I'm glad Riot took this into consideration, even though it was a really rare situation for most of the games. It was still annoying when it happened and didn't make any type of sense as well. Brand, passive damage increased. Brand jungle has been suffering from some pretty heavy jungle nerfs last season. It rarely sees play in the jungle anymore, so we're looking to loosen up on some of those damage cap restrictions. Damage cap per tick versus non-epic monsters goes from 7.5 to 10, and then from 15 to 20. Explosion damage cap to monsters by up by 20, so it's clear it's going to be a bit quicker. Um, but still, I don't think it's. Brand will be fine, you know. In some scenarios, it will be fine to be picked because it's mostly used as a counter pick, not as a blind pick as he was played before. It's a nice buff, but not that big of a deal. I would say 1%, 1.5% increase when it comes to win rate. Alright, excuse me. Darius. Darius is going to have his armor down by 2, and cooldown is going to be up by 2. I saw a lot of people overreacting into these 2 seconds, and I don't really agree. I think Darius is in a questionable spot. This will put him in a priority spot where, I mean, in a non-priority spot, because people will stop to ban him as much as before. Okay. So, armor down by 2 and 2 seconds in an ability that already has 24 seconds. Honestly, not that big of a deal, okay? So, you use this once per wave. You cannot use this twice per wave. It's not doable, you know? So, yeah, when it comes to early game and ganking situations, it doesn't change anything. Yes, you get less to armor, so you become you become more vulnerable actually, but it doesn't really change much. I would say it's 0.5 to 1% win rate drop overall. Gwen, final snip damage, 70 goes from to 60, so minus 10 damage, and basically they're reverting the resist, because early game it was too strong, you could bypass landing phase really effectively, and despite Gwen uh, being nerfed in later stages in comparison to the early game, um, she would still be really strong when transitioning into mid to late game. So obviously, if her laning phase was a lot stronger, it does make sense to increase her scaling resist and lowering and reverting back into the number 22. She was way too strong. I'm not sure why they're saying 15.6 if they're trying to change it into 25.06 or whatever the fuck it is. But yeah, Gwen is basically being reverted to her old numbers when it comes to W. Ivern, one of the biggest changes of the patch. People might think this is small, but this affects everything. This affects the way, obviously, the root duration, and it makes so that the daisy can be applied a lot easier in comparison to the 1.2. And you don't even max Q first, okay? So you will get the 0.4 root duration increase by not even maxing this ability. So huge change for Ivern. Yes, at level at maximum level it will be back to 2, uh, but sure, we're talking about early to mid game, huge buff when it comes to his Q utility. I don't think he's nerfed, by the way. I don't think he's weak. I'm sorry. I think Riot is scoping completely, similar to Lillia changes. I'm not sure. If you've seen my patch notes, I've said I don't think I'm not. I'm sure Lillia is not weak. She just doesn't suit the meta as much as before, but she can still be played when it comes to having J Smith. Some games where you can have quirky flexible into there with Yone, Smolder, and some AP champions that could actually suit with Lillia in between. So I think, yeah, Riot overbuffed and they're reverting the changes, but Lillia will still be okay. Yes, it's a 10% AP nerf, but keep in mind, she was already strong before. So, yeah, I think Riot completely slept on this one, and I think Ivern doesn't really need this change. So, yeah, Lulu. Damage is going to be decreased by 10. Maximum damage is also going to be decreased by 10, and the AP ratio is going to be untouched. This is fairly simple, right? Wants Lulu to have less damage, but this is a different change from Karma. Mantra Q because it would lose 10 damage, right? But Karma is mostly reliable in the laning phase when it comes to her damage. And Lulu, the biggest change is not the Q damage. The biggest change is Whimsy staying at 18 seconds for most of the time. Because, yeah, basically instead of having a 2-second reduction, you will always have flat 18. Yes, of course, you will do Ionian boots and some CDR in between, but it will be like 1 to 2% nerf in win rate to Lulu. Not the end of the world. She's in a really strong spot. She will still be fine. So it's a fine change, I would say. Naafiri, the most broken jungle in the patch, basically, is getting nerfed as expected. HP going down by 25, armor going down by 2, damage to monsters going down by 10%, up to 20% for minions when it comes to Q. So this is a mid lane buff overall, despite the 25 HP, and if you don't play versus AD matchups. W call of the pack, 22 seconds instead of 20. Fix the bug where W would sometimes out-destroy tower shots while Naafiri was untargetable. So plus 2 seconds, you will be more vulnerable, less monster damage, so the clear will be a bit slower and become a bit squishier. I don't think this is the end of the world for Naafiri, not at all. I think these changes are really small. These are really placebo overall. Only 25. This might drop like 1 to 1.5% win rate, but she's really dominant, and I don't think, I'm pretty sure, in 25.08 you will definitely see Naafiri being targeted again. Olaf can feel slow at higher attack speeds with no attack speed scaling, making you not feel good about using it and interrupting your auto attack flow. Non skills cast time based on attack speed. This is really good quality of life change because Olaf can deal more damage because of this. And you don't have to bypass your E now, because if you have a lot of attack speed when you proc W and become low HP, now it is reliable for you to apply the true damage from the E when you're having an extended fight. So in a really extended fight, this is a huge damage increase. It might not seem like it because it's only attack speed, right? But trust me, it is a big change, big quality of life change, and I'm a believer that Olaf was already in a good spot despite his itemization not being optimal in the meta. AB Shaco is already pretty strong, but AD Shaco has been lagging behind, buffing up some short-ranged IR commitment AD ratios to amplify the backstabbing assassin fantasy. So damage flat is going to be the same, and the percentage bonus AD is going up by 5%. Big change for his passive, honestly. And the Sieve is going up by 5% bonus AD as well. Big changes for AD Shaco. I still think AP Shaco will still outperform, but these are pretty good changes. I mean, you're having 5% in your Q and your passive. So, of course, this might mean a 2 to 3% augment when it comes to win rate, but AP Shaco will definitely still be the most viable option in comparison. Shen was always intended to be a functional speed pusher. Oh, okay, so basically attack speed and flat damage don't apply against structures. Percent max health damage is not applied. Okay. Quality of life change for Shen when it comes to speed pushing when he has ultimate and there's someone roaming around when he has ulti. So, yeah, it will deal more damage to structures. Yeah, sure. Singed per target cooldown going up to by 2. So damage per second is going up by 2.5% AP. Okay, nice change. And -5 when it comes to bonus stats. So they want to reduce flat value from the stats, but they want to increase scaling stats by 2.5%, and the target cooldown is going up by 2 overall. I mean, Singed is a really niche pick when it comes to OTP players, so yeah. I don't believe this is a huge change. We'll see though. Trundle slow, going up by 30 to 34 and then 46 into 50, so 4% throughout the ranks, and cooldown is going to be decreased by 3 seconds at level 1. This is crazy because now this is a good buff for Trundle top because there are some matchups where you can face Cyan, Ornn, even Shogath, and Trundle can really excel into those type of matchups as a counter pick. Trundle jungle can also function, but most importantly, Trundle support is now a possibility because of his utility. He has a lot of utility with this amount of slow. The cooldown being decreased by 3 seconds, it's actually huge. Very different from Darius losing 2 seconds on his Hyper Hand. So, as you might imagine, yeah, Trundle will be becoming more popular when it comes to a flexible pick. W from Volibear is going to have now bonus AD, 15%, okay. Xerath is going to be buffed in mid lane and nerfed in support. Early game, Xerath is going to be overall nerfed because he's going to be losing, not in his Q is only going to receive 5% AP. The W is going to be decreased by 10 flat, okay, so less poke initially, but plus 5% bonus AP. And the flat amount from Shocking Orb, this is actually quite shocking because this is an ability that deals an underwhelming amount of damage, and it's a skill shot. Keep in mind it's a skill shot, okay? So I'm really sad about them reducing this value and not increasing like this to 55% AP, or at least 50% AP. Yes, you could say that 55% AP is huge in comparison to 45, but let's be honest, it's a skill shot. Xerath is W, makes more sense to drop the value because it's a really simple skill to hit in comparison to his E, so yeah. His ultimate is going to be decreased by 10, so plus 5% AP. Huge buff for mid lane Xerath when you transition into mid game. Early game it will be a slight nerf, but when you have 2 items, you will feel these changes, and when you transition into third option, you will even feel it more because 90% AP on his Q is devastating for an ability. Yone, passive critical damage reduction removed, crowd control cleanse removed, critical strike damage is no longer reduced by 10%. Okay, so now it's 100% flat. And no longer cleanses crowd control upon returning. Tooltip clarifies, I'm sorry, that only damage from attacks and abilities is amplified. If you want the quickest TLDR possible, this is a buff for low elo and a nerf for high elo, because people in low elo don't know how to utilize this as much. This is what high elo players care about. Yone players really care about this interaction, the fact that you can class a lot of stuff, whether it's Zoe E, for example, Nautilus Redline, I mean, a lot of CC, Cocoon from Elise, you know, like you could predict this very simply, and low elo players can not really do it as efficiently. However, critical strike damage is going to be 100%. So this means that people in low elo, when they do Yone builds, they usually shift into crit builds more than high elo players, because high elo players usually tend to do Blade of the Ruined King, Shield Bow, Infinity Edge, and then they transition into a crit type of build. In lower elo, they usually go Yuntal, Infinity Edge, some kind of more aggressive build in comparison to having more sustain and utility. So I would say, yeah, this is a low elo buff for Yone and a high elo nerf for the champion overall. Really nice change though. I was not a fan of this. This is really unskilled. It didn't make any sense, in my opinion, to bypass. If it was a bit trickier for you to get the timing right, sure, but it's really simple. Okay, I did first time Yone, and I could do this with my eyes closed. Large adjustments to Yorick. I'm not going to read all of this, otherwise it gets really boring. But basically, what they're trying to do is get Yorick with a better early game, better early to mid game, and his late game is not going to be more vulnerable in comparison to before. So this is the really quick TLDR. As you can see, flat value is going to be increased and bonus AD is going to be decreased. So TLDR, Yorick will be better early to mid game, and when it comes to late game, it will be weaker than before in comparison to this patch, for example. Catalyst is going to be buffed. Really good change for Catalyst. I think this item fucking sucks ass, and I apologize for the language, but this item was really weak for a long time. I would barely do Rod of Ages to Rise because and the Nivea, for example, because the item was just too bad. I would just rush the Rafts and do something else instead of the old item. Build path Ruby Crystal, now it's going to be 2 Ruby Crystals and 200 gold instead of 600, good quality of life change, plus 75 mana, and the biggest change is Eternity mana restore from damage taken is going to be up by 3%, which is huge. Rod of Ages is also getting this. I think when you want to survive early laning phase and you want to get really cheap stats when you're scaling with Anivia, Rise, Kassadin, you can get Catalyst. You don't always need to upgrade into Rod of Ages though. You don't need to do it all of the games, okay? This is a really good defensive item. Defensive item. It doesn't cost as much, and you can transition into quicker power spikes instead of getting Rod of Ages right off the bat. Now, if you're against a composition that has a lot of damage and a lot of assassins mainly, a lot of threats, you can definitely do Rod of Ages, okay? The HP value, the mana value, the sustain that it gives you, it does make sense. But against compositions that you need to deal more damage, then if you feel free and if you feel safe to not do Catalyst, go ahead and do Xeraths in whatever champion you want, honestly. But if you want to survive early to mid game stages, this will be a really good buy, but it won't be as blind to do Rod of Ages, okay? So think about those scenarios and try to understand if it's really worthy for you to make that shift. Umbral Glaive, minus 100 gold, attack damage up by 5, blackout cooldown up by 40. Honestly, really weird change overall because, yes, minus 100 gold is more achievable for Pyke, for champions that want to take this item. Only Kha'Zix, I would say, probably Pantheon. Plus 5 AD and 40 seconds cooldown. I mean, yeah, sure, you will have trinkets, you will have red trinket most of the time, you will have your sweeper, but still, really weird change, and nearly no one gets this item apart from those niche picks, so kind of a underwhelming change. Now it's going to be ARAM changes, some swift play, quick play, arena changes. Honestly, I'm not going to run through these. We're going to have Clash. Lewis and Emporium has returned. This is really cool. It's going to be until 25.09, so get ready for that. Bug fixes, upcoming skins and chromas. Bengu Garen for the 1st of April and some other cool skins as well. Let's do a really quick TLDR of the patch. Okay. So basically, we're going to have a LeBlanc visual update coming in April 3rd. Homeguard and Fountain, this is completely fine. It's a really small nerf. Lane swap detection, even though it didn't happen in most of the games, now it will not be detected in the Raptor cap. Brent, it's a nice buff, 1 to 1.5% buff perhaps, but not that big of a buff. Darius, really small nerf, I would say 0.5 to 1% nerf overall. His cooldown is already high enough and he will be a bit more vulnerable when it comes to armor value. Gwen, basically they're reverting the changes. They acknowledge that buffing Gwen's early game wasn't the solution despite nerfing late game because she could bypass it really quickly and still have an effective impact when transitioning into that late game scenario. So Gwen will be a bit in a similar spot in comparison to the previous patch. Ivern, one of the biggest winners of the patch because he gets a 0.4 increase in an ability that it doesn't max first. So really big changes, especially because the Daisy interactions will be a lot quicker and easier and more effective to proc all of your combos, basically. Lillia, not sure why Riot buffed her the previous patch. They're reverting the change when it comes to her E, so minus 10% AP. Lillia will still be fine, but I don't know what got into Riot's head. Doesn't make any type of sense. Lulu, 1.5 to 2% win rate decrease, I would say. Cooldown is now going to be flat by 18 on her Whimsy, and her Q is going to be decreased on damage by 10 on minimum damage and 15 on maximum damage. Not the end of the world for Lulu at all, but it's going to be like a 2% nerf in her win rate overall. Naafiri, really small changes overall, I would say. Minus 25 AP, minus 2 armor. Clear will be a bit slower. Q will be stronger for mid lane Naafiri or top side Naafiri, and W cooldown is going up. So overall, really small changes. I think Naafiri is going to be affected maximum by 1 to 1.5% overall. Olaf, I think the champion is already in a good state in some scenarios as a counter or niche pick. Now he's getting a huge quality of life change because his E is going to be quicker in animation depending on the amount of attack speed that you have. So if you don't know how Olaf works, the lower HP you have, the more attack speed you have. When you proc W with low amounts of attack speed, you can now proc E without making it seem weird when you're auto-attacking your target as well. AP Shaco will still be stronger, but AD Shaco is getting some love. Plus 5% bonus AD on passive and Q, really nice. Q, more damage into structures from Shen. Singed, I would say it's a fair change. Overall, per target cooldown going to be increased. Damage per second is going up in skilling, but flat value from his stats is going down by 5. Mainly an early game nerf at level 6, not as big when it comes to level 16. Trundle can now be flexible into top jungle and support because of his utility changes. Probably Trundle support will become more popular because he loses 3 seconds and he has more slow percentage. Volibear now gains bonus AD when it comes to his empowered W damage. Xerath, huge buff for mid lane Xerath when it comes to 2 to 3 items transition into mid game, while Xerath support gets obliterated when it comes to his own damage. Yone, high elo buff for low elo buff for Yone players, high elo nerf for Yone players. Yorick, weaker late game, better early game. Catalyst, good option, no longer a shit item, better recipe, better values, better stats. Don't do Rod of Ages all the time, only if they have huge damage threats. And Umbral Glaive, I don't know what the fuck was Riot cooking. That's it for the patch.